Today's episode is sponsored by our good friends at MyPillow. MyPillow makes the best pillows, slippers, and so much more. I personally have the slippers and I love them. I know Havana has a pair, don't you, Havana?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I love the slippers.
And they're she wasn't paid to say that. And I think they're $35 right now. They are absolutely amazing.
The best.
You want to go to mypillow.com and use the code MISSION at checkout. That's mypillow.com code MISSION. And we would love to hear from you. Email us at momsonamission53@gmail.com or check us out at momsonamission.net. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite platform.
Our teenage guests today will absolutely amaze you. They have enjoyed rigorous studies and have been challenged to debate and utilize critical thinking. They have not been told what to think, but how to think. They don't simply know the difference between right and wrong, but long to do right over wrong. Welcome to the show, Havana Clark and Max Woods.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Moms on a Mission.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us. We were just wondering if you could just tell our audience who you are and where you go to school.
You go first, Max.
Okay. My name's Max, and I go to school at Augustine Christian Academy here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
And my name is Havana, and I also go to Augustine Christian Academy.
Have you guys gone there your whole schooling or just part way? Or
I joined in the 5th grade. Up until my 5th grade year, I had been homeschooled.
Okay.
But a lot of my education has incorporated a liberal arts program, a core curriculum that integrates subjects, a very classical approach to understanding education.
And I started in 7th grade 1 week late because I had been homeschooled up until that point and decided I wanted to go to school the week that school started. And I've absolutely loved it since then.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, tell us the difference between the education you've received compared to other schools at St. Augustine. What's the difference?
Well, St. Augustine is a classical school, which means we focus on the trivium, which I always get confused on what the 3 of them are, but I believe it's rhetoric, grammar, and what's the 3rd one?
Dialectic.
Okay.
Yes, dialectic.
So that's borrowed from the classical tradition of learning the trivium, the core of 3 subjects before moving on to the quadrivium and then to a specialized skill. And we integrate that at our school by incorporating the trivium into the 3 different stages of learning. Most would think of it as elementary school, middle school, and then high school. Well, we refer to that more in terms of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, which reflect the appropriate levels of learning at that stage of life.
And that's what's going to be emphasized. So for our senior thesis, which I think we're getting into later, the rhetoric phase is really emphasized. And also something different about classical education is it ties everything together instead of just you're learning history and now you're learning math. Everything is connected. We also have an emphasis on logic and reading classical texts.
Wow. I feel like I need to go there to school.
Oh, I would definitely like to do a redo and go to a classical school. I mean, I really didn't know much about it. I'd heard about classical education years ago, but really just in the last 6 to 12 months did I realize what I missed out on. So you guys realize the amazing education that you're getting. You realize
it is very exciting to see everything connect, at least for me personally. In doing our senior thesis, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't realize connected. Like mine relies heavily on court cases and the Constitution.
Okay.
And that's very interesting because depending on different topics, you may not immediately think, oh, the Constitution.
Right.
But the way that things connect is very fascinating.
And you're using primary sources. So you're actually reading the text of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers. That's a big part of the curriculum. Is that correct?
For sure. I think that's the biggest difference. I mean, we had a history class that earlier this year did not have a large emphasis. And I think it was you that brought up that we needed more original text to read. And that makes all the difference because you could be reading a history book about a subject and that's great. That's great. But every single book you're reading, it's going to have a bias and a slant, whether that's from a Christian worldview, an atheistic worldview. Yes. So reading a text for itself instead of reading a book about a text is very different.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good. Well, can you expound on what type of assignments have you received that possibly would be a bit more rigorous than maybe with standard curricula?
I mean, a lot of it's just reading the text, like the books. We also do Socratic circles. which are great.
Oh.
If you're reading a book and you're just answering questions, that's very easy to cheat on. You
Okay.
can just look up the questions.
Okay.
But if you are having to discuss the book, not only are you understanding and taking it in more, but you're also going to connect things you otherwise wouldn't.
So Havana, where does the Socratic circle come from? What is that?
That's Socrates, his
Right.
method of teaching.
Well, which involves a lot of like question and answer and bringing it to a higher level of understanding through discussion. Because, like you said, you juxtapose that next to a worksheet that says, here are the questions, fill in the answers for yourself, and then turn it in and get a letter grade. Well, it's very different when we're in that history class and it's here are the facts. What do you guys think? And where do
Wow.
you guys agree and disagree? And then that causes us to communicate on a different level than just, a worksheet.
And where else do we see this playing out in history? For instance, we're reading Night right now in our history class, which is not a classical book, but it's about the Holocaust. And you're making connections, not just this was something that happened back in the day, or also we're reading some of Hitler's like Mein Kampf excerpts of that.
Yes.
Where are we seeing this rhetoric today? And are similar things being said? Or is this something that happened one time versus Hitler used intense rhetoric? Well, that doesn't help anyone because you don't know what Hitler said. So you could be being told the exact same thing and not recognize it.
Oh, that's good. So go back to the Socratic circle. Can you kind of just, I want to visual, like, can you describe, are you actually sitting in a circle? Like, what does that look like? Describe that exactly.
Ideally,
Because I think
yes.
most people don't know what that is.
Sometimes we call it a Socratic seminar if we don't move everything around, but our school can be pretty flexible. We do a lot of quirky stuff, kind of like round table, which is something else I won't get into right now. But the Socratic circle is like, okay, let's move the tables, grab a chair. Everyone forms a circle. And then she's got a list of questions, but they're pretty open-ended questions. So I think like one example might be earlier in the year, we're studying like the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And then a simple question might be, okay, let's start the discussion. How did the Enlightenment impact political thought? And then the students are just free to give their input. And a lot of the grade is oriented on participation and, okay, how much did the student input? They don't have to have a right or wrong answer. They need to be interacting with each other.
And make an effort. And is that part of the test grade? Or it's just part of like a homework, like a participation, that kind of a grade?
It's more in a participation sense. Sometimes we do tests differently too. I know we just recently did a project actually where it was, okay, incorporating everything that you've learned from this semester, go ahead and teach it back to the class.
Oh.
Then you have learned the material when you can teach it back.
Right.
And does the discussion get lively?
Depends on the topic. Some of them have more than others. Some of them really have.
I would love to sit in on that.
Oh, that'd be great.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
we have a widely represented range of opinions at our school sometimes.
I think that's great, actually.
Too. I
Because
love this.
I think now culturally, it appears to me, in my opinion, that if you disagree with somebody, then you don't align, you might not care for them. And there's so many things that we do agree on, whether it's our faith, whether it is the Constitution. And I think, that I like that there are different views represented there and that kids get comfortable with debating. I mean, because debate drives change. And so if you're not comfortable with debating, then, you're all forced to succumb and agree with one particular thought process.
Well, and debate in today's world is honestly a lost art in a lot of ways. Because even if you're speaking with someone that you do agree with them, or even if they're trying to instill those values in their kids, but they don't teach them why, and that kid can't defend, and so they're not used to reading contrary ideas or beliefs, that is just as dangerous as being taught the wrong thing because you have no foundation. If you're just told this is true, but you can't defend it,
you don't know why.
You don't know why. And so as soon as someone brings up a different idea, you're just going to flow right with that because you have no basis for if it's your faith, if it's your constitutional beliefs, whatever that is.
Right. And
so good.
The Bible does say to study to show yourself approved, a workman who has no need of shame. And I know some of that's referencing, the word of God, but there's so much of the word of God, as you know that speaks to us being educated in general and just knowing why we believe what we believe.
For sure.
Yes. Well, Max, I'm going to focus in on you, zero in on you for a minute.
That's fine.
Okay. So the seniors at your school, you will have to write a thesis. I'm going to share a quote from your thesis.
Oh, sure.
Okay. This is what you state from Max. The problem was that the U.S. school system was no longer preparing students for the future. Instead of teaching them the skills they would need to succeed in the post-industrial era, they were focusing on teaching them how to use machines. Students were no longer learning how to think critically, to problem solve, or to communicate effectively. They were simply being trained to be more efficient automatons. So would you please expound on that?
Yeah. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about in my thesis, because I was looking around and asking, well, what am I passionate about? I know that I hate technology. I said stuff like that. I said, okay, well, my initial thesis statement was, okay, let's defund artificial intelligence because I don't like technology. And so I kind of workshopped with that, and I talked to people, I did interviews, I read some articles, and it was, well, that's not realistic because we were talking about this earlier. You know, companies like Google are just going to move overseas if we ban it in the United States. It's kind of a global thing. How are you going to work with an issue like that? So I talked to some other people, and they said, well, you've got to come up with, you know, an original statement, a practical solution. And suddenly something just kind of came to me by divine inspiration, as I say. And so my statement now is, since technological developments beyond the post-industrial era replace machine-human tasks, United States schools should convert from a machine learning basis to a classical education, because the classical method teaches students problem solving and communication. So I said, okay, well, where do I go from there? So I read some other books. I talked to some other teachers, and these teachers recommended other books that kind of addressed some of the history of education. One book I would plug into that quote you pulled was The Underground History of Education by John Taylor Gatto. Okay. And as I was reading through some of these sources, he lays out a narrative where you see, oh, compulsory schooling didn't always exist in the United States. And there were a lot of special interests involved in that movement. And a lot of what we consider the public schooling method or progressive education, whatever term you'd like to use, a lot of that was formed with an agenda in mind. And at the time, the economic agenda was to turn out really good factory workers.
Yes.
And what that meant was, okay, well, in the factory, when you change shifts, you ring a bell. Sounds familiar. When you change classes or change subjects, you ring a bell. That's one rendition of a practice there. And then they adopted other models of, honestly, indoctrination. It's not really that well hidden, because the Lancaster model that developed in the United States was actually derived from Hindu caste conditioning, because they looked at the general population and said, well, we need loyal subjects who will submit themselves to the king's authority. So how do we best indoctrinate them into what we need the people to know, so that we can keep them beneath us? And as these methods of, you know, mass public control got adopted throughout the United States, what we saw was that their economic motives were coming to fruition. They were having excellent economic growth in the factories, all of that. But through automation, a lot of these factory jobs kind of started to disappear. And I connected that to a presentation Jordan Peterson did in 2013 at the University of Toronto. And he went over the glaring problem with IQ in the job market was that if you follow all of the jobs that we're seeing are kind of being replaced by technology over time, those with a lower IQ basis aren't really able to compete in the market. You attach that with other developments, Tesla's trying to automate driving. Well, let's, discard any suppositions about, well, driving is too difficult to automate. Let's just assume for a moment that it does. That's displaced about 15% of the labor force, because the number one job for high school educated men in the United States is trucking, driving, taxi cab driving. All of that is just gone. So I asked myself, well, what are we preparing the next generation for if these machines that are the basis of the way we teach people, again, teaching what? Teaching a task, teaching a subject, teaching facts and knowledge. Well, that's not what's important in an education. We need to bring it back to the classical roots. People like George Washington, people like Thomas Jefferson, people like James Madison, who were all classically educated and came from these rigorous schools that taught them a whole curriculum about how the world interacted with logic and philosophy and liberal learning. Is okay, it's about a bigger picture than just what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. It's who are you? What's your identity? Why do you need to know these things?
That's really good. And I remember reading in your thesis when, I think it was at the end, when you said, you said you shouldn't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. What did you ask them? how they want to be?
Ask them who they want to be.
Mm.
Because that's the thing. I visited Hillsdale, so this is a bit of a shameless plug, but I did
We
a
love
college, I was visiting some colleges and I thought classical education, I'll take a look at Hillsdale. And so we made the trip all the way up to Michigan, and they had some really excellent presentations. I was sitting there going, yes. And one of the quotes I pulled was, we are human beings. We are not human doing. We are human beings. So what that means is we need to spend less time asking kids, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Ask them who they want to be when they grow up. And our education should reflect that.
Mm-hmm. That's so good.
Another point that really hit me when I was reading it, and I didn't get through the whole thing, but I plan to read it all the way through. You give me hope for the next generation.
Mhm.
Thank you.
For sure. Both of you do. But you said something that really hit me in the heart. And you said, with this automation that people will not be working, or they'll be taking away the joy of working, and that God made us to work. We were supposed to work, in the garden and wherever we were supposed to be working. And we take that away. And then the next step is depression and chronic pain, and basically just this spiraling down.
Mhm.
And I was like, I hadn't thought about, taking away like the jobs of these people. What are we going to do?
And I don't know if you remember, but when he also was stating that the word for work also means worship.
Yes.
And I didn't think about that either. I thought, in the garden, even before sin, there was
Worship,
work,
yes.
and he designed that work to worship. And I was like, wow. I mean, when you step back and look at the big picture about automation and how you're destroying God's plan.
Yes.
Like,
So
at such a
good,
deep
Max.
level. Yeah, it was,
So
very
good.
Which I
good.
forget
So good.
which, shameless plug for the Bible, but I got a lot of this information from interviewing with Mr. Clark, and he was telling me, the Hebrew word for work is worship, avodah. It's the same word. Our work is worship. And one of his corollaries to that, as we were discussing automation, he says, well, I think what we're seeing is the fulfillment of the prophecy in Revelation. I think it's Revelation chapter 13, but you can look into it. And in Revelation, it states, at this time and during the Great Tribulation and all these events, there will be no worker or craftsman in the field. And so, well, what does that mean? It means that we will get to a point where we won't work. I don't know, but it sounds like biblical prophecy is being fulfilled in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. How would you both think a biblical worldview has been taught to you over the years? Would you feel like it was just naturally woven in through the curricula, or I know it has to be intentional, but how do you think that you were able to receive a biblical worldview in your education?
Well, like you said, it's intentional. Someone doesn't just innately pick up a worldview. You have to intentionally seek that out. But I would say largely for me, it was in U.S. history with one of the founders of our school. I absolutely love him. His name's Mr. Post. And he would constantly weave in just highlighting what was in the Constitution and why it was there. Or for instance, with separation of church and state, the intention was to keep the state out of the church, not the church out of the state, which is very interesting because you don't normally hear that. And I wish I could think of the quote right now to put it all in context, but you can do research into that. But there's so much in American history that derives from biblical values, or even the British, what is it called? The British law. I don't remember.
Common law.
Yes, yeah. Common law, and how that was initially derived from the 10 Commandments.
Oh, wow.
But you don't know that until you go and look into, okay, what is the number one source of these people who are writing the Constitution and other documents? Where are they getting their values? And it's just very interesting once you get into all that. But again, that's intentionality. And it comes from those original sources, but researching, okay, where did the original sources come from and who influenced them?
So what books do you use? I mean, I assume you don't use all primary sources, original sources. Do you use other regular textbooks?
Yes, we have for history right now. I believe we're reading a Bob Jones book.
Okay.
But I like reading the documents better. They're a little more interesting.
Well, and like the textbooks will have excerpts of a primary source, but really it's not different. I mean, it's so much different from engaging with the author's thoughts, reading the whole work whenever you can. You're saying.
Well, I was just going to say there's still a bias. Like you said, it's very different reading that.
Because like, what are you excerpting?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what are you choosing to take out and what are you choosing to leave? And it's not necessarily that the person writing the book desires to deceive you or not
Right.
the full truth. But we all do have things that we believe, or even just life experiences that kind of
Sure.
shape the way we view different things and what sticks out to us.
Yeah.
So if you read the Constitution, that's different than reading. If you go on Google and you say, I don't know what the 14th Amendment means, please explain it to me. The explanation is different than just reading it.
Yourself.
Yes.
Mhm.
Or especially reading it in context of the time it was written.
Yes.
Oh,
that's
a good
good.
point.
Because that's something we've gone over quite a lot in our history classes, is understanding presentism, chronological snobbery. A lot of these are fallacies we're taught in our logic classes. Is, okay, well, how can we avoid falling into a pitfall of saying, well, this is a very current event, so it must not be good because it's new. And how do we keep from falling into the pitfall of saying, well, this is a very old thing, so it must be bad because it's antiquated? Where's the balance we can discern between those two and say, well, is this good or is this bad, regardless of time?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And having values that last throughout all time is very important, because society does change so much and we repeat the same flaws just in different ways over and over and over again.
Right.
And so if you're not familiar with the Bible, and I mean, our school shamelessly teaches from a biblical worldview, and they tell you that. So I've never been in a class and gone, wait a second, I didn't know you were teaching from the Bible.
Yeah.
Because we know the bias. So if you're at a public school, the bias is going to be anti-God. Now it
Mhm.
might be, we're not teaching any certain religion, so really we don't have a bias. Well, that's deceptive, because
Mhm.
they do have a bias.
Right.
So at our school, yes, we have a bias.
I mean,
And
it's
we
called
know that we do.
Augustine Christian Academy for a reason. There,
Right.
you can't really hide that bias.
Well,
Surprise.
something we've talked about for the course over the past few months is talking about that every school does have a worldview. We may not recognize it in the public school, so we're not going to have the Bible because we're going to be not Christian. Well, you are teaching some type of worldview. What is it? I'm not sure sometimes.
Yes.
But that's what I love about the school that you're attending. And it's just out in the front. We are teaching a biblical worldview. We are identifying our worldview. And I wish all schools would identify their worldview so that parents could make better decisions for their children.
Well, I think it's important for parents to also teach their kids that whatever you are reading, whatever book it is, whatever school you're going to, whoever you're talking to, everyone has a bias. So just
Yes.
get to the facts as quick as possible, because everyone has a bias and you can't escape that. And if someone's telling you they don't, you should be on the lookout.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and you
Very
talked
good
about
point.
values. One of my favorite Socratic circles, classroom discussions we did was, what is goodness? What is truth? What is beauty? And we just asked those questions openly. And it really brought to reality something C.S. Lewis wrote about in The Abolition of Man. He described the Tao, which is like his definition of the good, which you can capitalize that and explain that however you want. But C.S. Lewis noticed in education actively, they were trying to remove the Tao in discussion of an objective good, an objective beautiful, an objective truth. And if you're removing that, you're replacing it with something else. And that's what's so important about a biblical foundation, is acknowledging what is our good that we are striving for. Because if you don't define that, you're going to be pretty lost.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to what Max was saying and say that another great thing our school does is we don't do the bell curve. Now, we've had like an odd class here or there where a new teacher has done a bell curve, but a bell curve is just lowering the standard.
Wow.
Because you're just basing it off of where the students are. Instead of, you can maybe modify the curriculum a bit or say, maybe we're not ready for this level of whatever. But if you're bell curving something because people are getting answers wrong, I really don't think that's the right way to approach something.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. It's just very different, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. It pushes back against the norm and what the culture is, the direction the culture is going.
I think we've covered some of this, but let's go over it again a little bit more in more detail. Could you give us some examples of demonstrating how you've been taught not what to think, but how to think something?
So the Socratic circle was one example.
Yeah.
What else do y'all do to
Foster that?
I would present the senior thesis as one example.
Yeah.
You cannot graduate from high school at ACA unless you complete one of these. It's a 15-page minimum. And what this senior thesis is it's a class that you take, and the whole process is a capstone of everything you've learned in your time at the school. And so what they really appreciate about the way I made my presentation was I was incorporating things I learned throughout my grammar stage, my dialectic stage, where I learned, how to argue and present facts, things I was learning from the rhetoric stage of how to be able to communicate winsomely. And all that's supposed to come together in something that the student can identify with. And they don't even have to agree with their thesis statement, but if they can present a case and defend it clearly, then they have succeeded in striving for the classical method, which is being able to ask, why, being able to answer why we think, not just what to think, but being able to ask the student presenting that, well, why do you believe this? And they can respond coherently.
And that's really the ultimate goal when you're going to school there. That's the ultimate goal. When you produce a graduate, this is what you want them to be able to do when they go off into the world, right? Is to know how to think and how to defend how they think too.
And I think the Socratic circle prepares you so much for that, because in a Socratic circle, you cannot be offended. I mean, you can choose to be offended and run out of the room, and there are people that have done that. But if you choose to do that, you're missing out.
Max,
on
is
so
she
much.
talking about you?
I don't think so.
I can't see that.
No, I know.
But I mean, it really does. It trains you that, okay, if I'm saying something, so like when we were defining truth and beauty and all that, someone would define beauty and someone else would go, okay, but does that make sense? Because what about this? Society says this is beautiful. Or what about, and we just went through all that. And it's humbling because you can be wrong. And you don't have to stick. If you're wrong, you can change what you believe. That's allowed. That's
it's
okay.
True. I've been victim to this.
I love that.
But it prepares you, because then when you're in a room in front of a whole bunch of people and you're the only one defending an idea, in a Socratic circle, there might be a few of you that tend to agree, but you're prepared to defend yourself, because if you realize, and we have boards and stuff that prepare you. So
yes, this isn't like the fish out of water. Like you submit a paper first draft, and then you're just in front of a room full of parents. That we've got like checkpoint levels where they say, okay, these are questions you'll probably want to have answers for, and maybe these are some things you could change about your presentation. Maybe try explaining this that way. There's it's pretty comfortable to be eased into it. It's not to say it's not rigorous, but there's a lot of stages to this journey. They cut it down. Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, you realize, like even you were saying with your thesis, how it was modified, that, oh, okay, maybe this doesn't work with the way the world works, or maybe this is great in thought, but maybe not good in practice. And the teachers do a really good job of challenging you. So all the time in classes, if there's discussions, a lot of times, a big part of the process is learning that you're wrong and adjusting based off of facts, or what we've seen in history. A lot of times we get into communism and different things. The theory is very different than the implementation. And that is a really great thing about the schools, being able to discuss and recognize those faults and things that maybe I see a fault in, but someone else doesn't. And so that kind of calls them out, or vice versa. It really opens your eyes in that way.
Well, that perfectly leads to the next question. So some educators believe that students need to be exposed to CRT and various woke ideologies in high school curricula, since they will encounter that in college. How would you respond to that?
They should certainly be aware of it, but in the same way, just knowing the worldview, because you're going to be told this is truth, this is not a worldview, and absolute truth exists. Yes. So you need to be aware that, okay, why is CRT wrong? Because I'm assuming the majority of your audience is not super pro CRT, and I agree with you, but you have to be able to defend. So if you get into the fact of, okay, how many blacks versus whites are imprisoned, and, why does this relate to the structure of a home? Maybe not just the color of your skin, getting into all that, because if you just tell a kid, oh my gosh, CRT is wrong, you can't read this because this is bad. Well, then they're going to be A, intrigued, and B, when they get to it, they're going to think that you're crazy because you were shielding them. If you know the truth, why would you be afraid of a lie?
Oh, that's good.
Why would you hide from a lie?
Wow.
You know the truth. So instead of telling your kids, hey, that's a lie, when you stay away from it, you need to say, okay, this is the truth. So, the money thing, right? You study the way a real dollar feels to recognize a fake one. And so it's the exact same way when it comes to your kids, is they need to be exposed to it, but you're not exposing them saying, okay, here's CRT. We're going to get super into it right now. First, you teach them the truth, and then you expose them to CRT and you explain this is why it's wrong. And they need to be able to back it up, not just say this is wrong. I can't read that.
That's good. Almost like you're creating a lens through which to see CRT, the lens of truth.
Yes.
And then they're already rooted and grounded in truth. And then you look at this and apply the truth. And that happens to not be true according to the lens of the Word of God.
And it's the exact same with apologetics, right? I mean, you study the Word of God and then you say, okay, here are common theories that people that don't believe in Jesus say. They say he didn't exist. Okay, well, that doesn't make sense because he's listed in all these documents. They say, well, maybe they hid the body. Why does that not make sense? So getting into all that, exposing your kid to the lie, but knowing why the truth is the truth, you don't need to be afraid of the lies.
Wow.
Good.
That's really good.
Okay, you're going to be on the hot seat still, Havana. You're on the hot seat. So tell us about your thesis. We want to hear a synopsis of your thesis and what was the process like for defending it?
Okay, so my thesis statement is that minor students, vaccines should not be mandated for minor students to attend public school in the state of Oklahoma. And the crux of my argument, it comes down to parental rights. It's not a pro-vaccine paper. It's also not an anti-vaccine paper, which a lot of people believed it was anti-vaccine. So that was always interesting. That comes up in questions all the time. But the main idea is that in the Constitution, the government's job is to protect the rights of the people. The government's job is not public health. So it all comes down to that. So at the end, there's always questions about, what if my kid is immunocompromised? Are you saying that we should kill my kid by not vaccinating your kids? And, people get really intense about it. But the thing is that we care about that kid. And I'm only attacking public schools because that is a public institution that is taxpayer funded. So if you would like to send your kid to a private school, I'm not getting into that. I believe you have the right to send your kid to a private school. And if a private school wants to require vaccinations, they can take that up with the Constitution, go for it. I don't care. But if your kid is at a public school where you are paying as a taxpayer to send them there, they should not be able to mandate because it is a governmental institution set up by the government. And the government's job is to protect rights, not make parental choices or dictate public health.
Wow.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, that's good. And when do you defend it?
I believe thesis is on the 12th.
Yeah, 12th
correct?
of May, around like 6:30 or 7. They haven't quite 7. Okay, so they have that solid. There's some dispute over the dates and times, but yeah, we have a thesis night where you can they have breakout sessions after the keynote speaker in the great room where everyone's there. And they break out into different sessions and you can sit through maybe 2 or 3 different theses. They've got, a rubric of who's doing what. And you can just go and learn and listen and ask questions. And you'll get to see the capstone work of each student throughout this high school journey.
So we can come and watch you?
Please do.
Wow. Well, we should all go there.
Yeah, I know we
Bring
would
a
learn
crowd.
a lot.
Yeah.
We would learn a lot.
It's a thesis party.
Oh, yes.
So now I'd like you to speak to parents who are going to be making a decision where they're going to be placing their children for 16,000 hours of K through 12 education. And what factors should they be considering when selecting a school? Because that's a lot of hours. When you add up K through 12, it's about 16,000 hours. And it's kind of a big decision when you're giving your child over to be taught a worldview. And so what would you say to parents? What would some factors be that they should consider?
Well, as you said, worldview. Is the school transparent about their worldview? Are they sharing it? The curriculum, I would highly encourage you to read some of the curriculum. Don't just send your kid to school. And make sure that they're reading original sources. So maybe the school's not, all reading original sources. Obviously, we don't even do that. But if you notice the school's not reading any original sources, it's all just textbooks and your kids get home with a whole bunch of busy work, that should be a cause for immediate concern because your kids should not just be writing down answers from a history book about this happened in 1892. If they can't explain the idea to you or tell you anything about the literature that was written there or anything that the people in that time would have actually interacted with, that is a cause for concern. And then just make sure that the environment that your kid is in is one that encourages thought. Because if they're in an environment where any sort of disagreement, you can't argue, that is, again, concerning because they will not have a basis for what they believe. And again, this does not mean that you should put your kid in an environment where people are arguing just to be argumentative, in the sense of like, oh my gosh, they're bullying. This is just, you want your kid to be able to defend and discuss and read original text and interact with them.
That's good.
What do you think, Max?
Well, I think I was going to go off of something Havana said, being able to argue. I think that students should be required to take a speech class of
that's a
some
great
sort in
idea.
order to graduate high school. There are a few factors for that. One of them, Havana touched on, is we learn in our classical curriculum about the differences between argument and fighting. I think what we see a lot today in
Good
public
one.
discourse is a lot of fighting and very little argument happening, because argument involves making points with evidence and using good rhetoric. Our speech class is called rhetoric, and it's, well, how do we communicate winsomely, not just how do we communicate simply, oh, here are my 3 points, boom, 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 I'm not elaborating any further. How can we use style? How can we use decorum? How can we present ourselves and make our case appealing to the public observer? And I think there's a huge lack of that. Perhaps that's intentional. I'm not
I
super
think so.
familiar with the agenda, but when you look at this intense polarization, well, it's how can we get people to actually talk to each other on a level playing field? How can we get people to understand you need to define your terms before you engage in an actual argument? Because if I'm defining critical race theory one way and you're defining it another, we could fight for hours and get nothing done because we're not on the same terms. This is, again, understanding why are we having that conversation, not what is going on in this conversation, because that's how things get solved, is understanding the purpose, not just the facts.
Thank you, Max. I
Wow,
love that.
that's
I mean,
good.
the art of arguing, there is an art to it. And so much good comes out of good arguing, great ideas, critical thinking.
And our founders understood this. This is why they designed our government the way it was because it needed a classical education to sustain that kind of argument. But what we see a lot in our politics today is infighting, is polarization,
Fighting,
is a
and
lack
nothing.
of discussion and argument.
Yeah, and nothing gets accomplished.
Nothing gets done.
Yeah. Well, you guys are amazing. I love this conversation, and we could keep going for a
Right,
long
right.
time. And I want to throw something to Miriam. I think that Moms on a Mission should develop Socratic circles for adults.
Oh, that'd be great.
I mean, we didn't get this education, but I think that would be really fun.
Maybe
I mean,
Havana and
yes,
Max could lead
yeah,
us.
they could lead us. I just love that idea.
It's a great
I wanna do
idea.
that. Okay, so what's after graduation? You guys are graduating pretty soon. Do you have some plans for the summer and coming up next fall?
Well, I'm planning on getting into Liberty University online because I would like to eventually become a teacher. And I'm also going to be doing some of the Hillsdale classes, but I'm doing online for Hillsdale,
Okay.
which is free. You get the education, but you don't get the degree. So that's why I'm also doing Liberty at the same time. And then I'm going to be working with my dad a little bit and just developing sales and people skills and all those basic essentials. And that's my plan.
Sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
I'm planning on studying mechanical engineering at Oral Roberts University. I'll see how that works. My fallback is political science because my end goal is to study law and then practice and then perhaps run for office. But like there's stages there. And so my next step would be mechanical engineering.
I found someone that wants to run for office. I keep asking people.
Yes, she
It's
does.
Max. Okay. We got you down. In a couple of years, you just have to be 25, right, to run for House.
I
So-
haven't really thought that far yet.
Well, we're going to stay in touch.
I'm
We're going
typically
to
of,
stay
like,
in touch.
the like spirit of the Senate party. I'm more like, oh yeah, people shouldn't be in office unless they're like 90 out of like I'll put more trust in someone with more wisdom than me.
I don't know. I think
I
you
would
guys both
raise
have-
the voting age if I had the choice.
I think right now I would vote for both of you if you were running for office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. It was so much fun. And we want to say thank you to our listeners for listening in today. And we would love to hear from you. Let's get connected. First, follow us on your favorite platform so you can get notified when new episodes are released. And then go to our website at momsonamission.net. That's momsonamission.net. And shoot us an email with questions or comments at momsonamission53@gmail.com. That's momsonamission53@gmail.com.
Moms on a Mission's excited to partner with our friends at MyPillow. According to sleep experts and sleephealth.org, over 50 million Americans struggle to get a good night's rest. That's where MyPillow comes in. They make the best pillows, sheets, mattresses, and mattress toppers. Several years ago, I was having trouble falling and staying asleep due to neck and shoulder pain. Luckily, I heard an ad about MyPillow and decided to give it a try. After 3 or 4 days, I really began to feel a difference. I was sleeping better and my neck and shoulders felt so much better. MyPillow really does help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. Moms on a Mission wants you to get a great night's rest too. Go to mypillow.com right now and use the promo code MISSION for up to 66% off your purchase. MyPillow products are made in America and have a 60-day money-back guarantee and lifetime warranty. Remember, go to mypillow.com, put in the special code MISSION for your special Moms on a Mission discount. Thank you and God bless.
Hey guys, it's Moms on a Mission here. Are you worried about your financial stability and protecting the money for which you work so hard? The problem is stock market volatility and inflation. You may be wondering what you can do to preserve your family's wealth. We at Moms on a Mission encourage you to reach out to our friend Andrew Sorcini with Beverly Hills Precious Metals. Andrew is the expert in educating you to help you find the right balance of gold and silver for your family portfolio. He made it so easy for me to add precious metals to my financial investments. I simply mailed a check to Beverly Hills Precious Metals and my silver showed up on my doorstep a few days later. It was so easy. Go to bh-pm.com to save a little money and tell them that Moms on a Mission sent you. That's bh-pm.com. Don't wait. Protect your wealth today by going to bh-pm.com and tell them that Moms on a Mission sent you. Hi everybody, it's Moms on a Mission here. Recent research from the CDC says that millions of Americans develop parasitic infections and symptoms often go unnoticed or are misdiagnosed.
Parasites are the cause of many health problems, such as anxiety, depression, chronic pain, fatigue, and unexplained digestive issues. We all need a common sense strategy to improve our health.
We at Moms on a Mission encourage you to reach out to our good friend, Dr. Jason Dean. Dr. Dean's Full Moon Protocol provides all-natural detoxification and fights inflammation. These supplements are made with 100% organic ingredients and are proven to kill parasites safely and effectively.
To order your Full Moon Protocol, go to bravetv.store/mission to save $20 off your first order. That's bravetv.store/mission. Order Full Moon Protocol and start killing those foreign invaders that have been keeping you sick. That's bravetv.store/mission to receive $20 off your first order.